John Reed. We're going to talk HANA ROI, building a business case, a real deep dive for the real hardcore HANA folks and people who want to understand how to leverage these investments to really get results. I've got someone's name who I may not be able to totally pronounce, but it's my buddy Tony Gooderslow. How's it going, Tony?
Going good, John. How are you doing?
Tony's with Teklink. Tony and I met at the HANA 2014 show where he did a very interesting presentation. I've been very frustrated with, amidst all the HANA hype, really having difficulty talking to customers about how to really get a return on a HANA investment in terms of how do you build out a use case. And you guys have really come pretty far, I think, in terms of a method that not only sort of challenges customers to think through numbers, but also to really think creatively about use cases and to involve business users in new ways. Would you say that's a pretty fair description of what you've worked on?
Yes, yeah, that's a good way to describe it.
Okay, so we've got something kind of special today, and I would add that while we're going to be focusing on HANA, I think these approaches could really be adapted very well to other analytics solutions, other big data solutions, other environments where customers are trying to make sense of how do I pull the trigger on this? I want to, I know that I could probably make better use of some of this information, but how? So this, I think you're going to really get a lot out of this. But what we're doing is we're going through a slide deck that Tony and his team presented at the HANA 2014 show. So we're actually going to post the slide deck on SlideShare so you'll be able to see the slides. I may do a little screen share here, but I probably won't go through all the slides that way because it's not that easy to toggle back and forth. So, but you will have the opportunity on SlideShare to really see the slides, and I'll try to post the audio with the slides there so you can hear the narration. So what we're going to do is kind of walk through the different components in Tony's presentation, and he'll add color to the slides, and I think by the end of it you'll have a whole different idea about how you can creatively approach HANA use cases, and not just technical TCO, but overall business results. So with that, I'm going to return to the slides I'm looking for. Tony, the first slide is just the title, so I don't think we have to spend much time there. That's actually slide 0 in the deck. So for the slide share, folks, let's move into slide 1 here, which sort of just gives an overview of the various aspects of your presentation. One thing I'll point out is that you guys are big advocates of a proof of concept approach to reduce the risk, so let's make sure we cover that. And okay, we'll get into all these bullet points. There's about 6 of them, so we'll be getting into them. And the first of them is defining a strong business case, which is slide 3. And now we are on slide 4, which is a little self-explanatory, I guess, in terms of benefits and costs, but Tony, I can tell you some companies do seem to charge ahead without thinking through this. So give us a quick gut check on what this is about.
Sure. Well, what we found is that, as you said, a lot of times companies get real excited about the prospect of putting in a new technology, and it tends to also be very prevalent in IT departments where a lot of folks, we're all computer geeks. We get really excited about this kind of stuff, but we may not always be thinking through in a true business case from a financial perspective. And the fact of the matter is, when you go to your company executives and ask them for a check for this big investment, they're going to be looking at it from a strictly financial point of view. So we're just kind of trying to take this and say, you got to step back and think about it as though you're doing it from a project finance model. So just like if you were a company that was going to build a factory to produce widgets, they have a whole financial model of determining how many widgets will the factory produce and how much revenue and income, cash flow for the life of that factory will generate, and turn back and say, is it worth the investment? And there's some very common financial terms they use to evaluate that: net present value, internal rate of return, and payback period are some of the most common 3. And you got so in this slide we're just talking about how do you calculate that? What are the different variable inputs you need to figure out, put that formula together? And if you go to a CFO or a financial executive and you start talking NPV and internal rate of return, then you're really going to get their ear, and that's how you're going to be able to have a true business case and discussion about taking the next step in investment in technology.
Right. So in this case, we can talk about project finance, which isn't typically used for IT, and it also is a great way to start building a bridge to the business people who understand financial planning on those terms for projects. Now we're moving into slide number 4, which introduces your net present value algorithm that you have here, which is something that is actually available online. So we'll include a link to that. But
right, and so it's not my algorithm. This is the commonly accepted financial formula. You can find this at any MBA class or at any financial website. So.
Right, right. And through the course of our presentation, we'll go through some of these different numbers and how they get plugged in the case of HANA. So that's one piece of the puzzle.
Right.
So there's an immediate caveat in slide number 5, which is that a lot of these inputs are not easy to quantify, including the difficulty of projected lifespans and taking into account risk. Is there any big takeaway from this slide?
Well, I think so. I think the biggest takeaway is that unlike a factory that's building widgets, it's a little bit harder to actually put numbers around the value and some of the different things with IT. You know, in the previous slide we talked about there's the 4 key inputs you need. The benefit or value, or from a financial term we would call the cash flow, the cost, and then the time, and finally the risk. Now, of these 4 things, cost is probably the easiest one. And a lot of times, you know, when IT folks, that's all we focus on. How much is the licensing? How much is the hardware? What's the project resourcing cost going to be? And everyone races to figure out the costs. And of course, you need to know that. But the other 4 things kind of get ignored or overlooked a lot of times. And so, oh yeah.
Yeah, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, so you know, probably the most important when you figure out a business case is you got to understand also what the benefit's going to be and put a number on it.
Right.
And from IT, we always struggle with that because a lot of times IT and technology is an efficiency play. And HANA especially, when we talk about making things go faster, accelerating your analytics or your data warehouse or other technical processes. And so how do you go about putting a dollar figure on that? How much is it worth to your organization to have faster reports, to have, you know, faster data loads? And that's where a lot of people get stuck, and that's where they kind of end right there and say, well, you know, we're already pretty fast, and, you know, what's the difference going to be if we speed them up a little bit? Is it going to equal real savings? A lot of times they say, well, you know, it's not going to mean a headcount reduction, it's just going to mean people are a little bit more productive. But is it really worth the significant cost that a HANA project really entails?
Right. It's a pretty limited use case, and the challenge, of course, with these numbers is that you can create funny numbers pretty quickly, like, you know, how do you come up with a realistic number for risk, for example, and some of your future slides are going to help us, I think, with that aspect of it. So let's press on.
Yeah.
So here's a couple with there's some proven steps for filling out some of these numbers. Any comments on this?
Yeah, so we have put this methodology together, and that's what my presentation's about. But I think the key one being that when you go to look at the value, the benefit, you really want to cast as wide a net as possible and think about all the different ways that HANA can change the paradigm of what you currently have in your IT and analytics department. And so it can be a lot more than just speeding up reports, but enable a whole lot of different things. And so we work through this process where we go through and evaluate, start with, instead of saying, well, what are all the things HANA can do, first evaluate and identify all your critical business processes and figure out what are the key value drivers. How can each area of your business improve? And then look at it through that lens to see, well, how can we leverage HANA to do that? So we'll get into that in the future slides too. But when we start talking about things like real-time data, being able to integrate multiple sources of data like point of sale or syndicated data, being able to reduce any type of overnight lag, would give people the ability to drill down to the most granular level of detail without having any performance concerns. That's where we start to see some light bulbs go off and new value drivers come out that they might not have previously considered.
Right. So it's a pain points and opportunities discussion. Let's press on. Now we're in slide 7. Now we're looking at some of your recommendations for the time and the risk components of that formula. Any comments on that?
Well, time can be pretty straightforward. Usually you'd want to stick with your standard depreciation schedule. So a lot of companies will have a standard depreciation accounting schedule that they use for software and hardware. But you may want to adjust that a little bit more based on the criticality of the system. And so basically the longer the life of the asset, the longer the value of the time, the more business case you're going to get out of it. If you say you're going to put in HANA and you only think it's going to be around for 5 years, well, that may be tough to justify the investment. But if you say, we're going to put this in as a fundamental enterprise platform, and this is going to be our new, whether it's your new ERP system or your new data warehouse for the foreseeable future, you can probably predict, anywhere from a 7 to 10 or more lifespan, and that's then going to further strengthen your business case.
Right. And with the risk, you have a weighted average cost of capital, discount rate that you can plug in, and then you're making the case that with the proof of concept you can reduce the risk, and we'll get into that further about the POC.
Yep.
So now we're in the second phase of your presentation, which has to do with identifying and evaluating critical processes. So going to move right into that, which is slide number 9 in our deck. And this is one of the parts where I think you really start to deviate from that classic sort of IT-based, wouldn't you like to speed some stuff up approach to HANA. You're talking with process area owners and understanding the vision, understanding their critical issues, their pain points. Tell us about this.
Sure. So, like I was saying, this is trying to identify critical value drivers across your whole organization. And when we talk about HANA, most of the time you want to think about it as a true strategic platform that you're going to be deploying that could impact multiple areas. I've heard of some places that are just doing very limited HANA deployment for one particular use. But if you really want to build a holistic business case, we recommend doing a much more broad strategic approach, which enables you to really cast this very wide net across all your enterprise processes. So in the slide, what I'm kind of laying out is just an example of an interview map of going to talk to the different process owners. But you'd want to go across all the different functions of your business. And with each one, you want to understand what's their strategic future vision, what are their current pain points, and also what are the things that they do on a daily basis, what's the day in the life of, and how could HANA or new technology make it better or open up new opportunities for them.
So you've done this on projects where your team would literally sit down with not just finance, not just IT, but you might talk on this slide we have transportation, promotional accounting, sales, operations. I would take it some of these people are a little surprised to be pulled into a conversation of this kind.
Yes, they are, absolutely. But usually it's
but in a good way, right?
Right. Yeah, very much so. So a lot of times we get the response like they've said, no one's ever asked us these questions before. This is the first time anyone's actually approached us and had this conversation with us. So they're very, once you get them talking, they're usually very eager to share their thoughts, their ideas, to tell about kind of how they think their job could be better, or what they work on, what their area could do better. Of course, a lot of times they love to complain about the current system and give you their laundry list of complaints of what they currently have to work with.
Right.
But those all, if you have the right ear for that, you can listen and hear how all those then can be translated to pain points or opportunities for improvement, or in some cases maybe even ways to give them new capabilities and innovations that they currently don't have.
Right, and I'm sure some of you are wondering how that fits into the broader HANA method, so we'll get to that. So slide 10, this is interesting because this starts to get into that part of it of, okay, now you're not just talking about sort of general pain points, you're asking questions that help draw out how HANA capabilities, big data capabilities or what have you, can impact what they're doing in a positive way. So everything from seeing data in real time to one of my favorites, which is bringing in external data sources, whether it's social media, which is not my personal favorite, but point of sale data can be very powerful. Geolocational data, all kinds of organizations releasing data by API that might be publicly available that could impact your decisions or business opportunities. So that's sort of one of the things you do then is you go through all this with your process owners.
Right. Yeah. So as you said, when we sit down with some of these functional process leads, they're surprised that we're having the conversation. And when we talk to them, we don't want to just say, well, how could HANA help you? Because they may just give you a blank stare.
Yeah.
Or even if they know what HANA is or have heard of it, they might just say, well, I don't know, if it makes things go faster, it'd be nice to have my reports come back faster. And that's, so we try to ask them somewhat leading questions, not to, put words in their mouth, but to get them thinking about all the new capabilities that they may not be aware that HANA can enable.
Right.
So like you said, kind of touching on all those other key points, what if you could bring in social media and tie it to your sales data so that you could see in real time if you're running a 2-week promotion, how's the consumers reacting to it in week 1, so you can make changes to it in real time and potentially reallocate your marketing dollars without being effective.
Right.
You start talking in terms like that and they say, gosh, no one's ever said this before. We've always been told what we can't do, what the limitations are, and the walls we have to work in. So if you tell them, let's break down all the walls and start scratch. If you could do anything you want and had data at your fingertips, whatever data you need, how could that really improve your business, or what value drivers would that provide to you?
Yep. Okay. So at this point, we've got a lot of good information on the struggles, the challenges, and also we've begun to kind of prod and pry a little bit on what the opportunities could be, knowing some of the things that HANA can do. So now we're going to move on to slide 11, which kind of shows the goals of some of these interviews, business drivers, processes, KPIs and metrics, pain points, existing gaps and shortcomings. These are some of the key things that can come out of these process owner discussions. Any quick comment on that?
No, I think that's it.
Okay.
I think with the KPIs and metrics, I had that as a bullet. Most of the time, they already know what their KPIs are, but I guess it's rather how if you could improve one of those KPIs, even by just a small percentage or a small amount, what type of business impact would that have?
Right.
So there's if they're talking about KPIs like we do a lot of work with consumer packaged goods companies, so they track case fill rate very closely, and that's one. If you can tell them maybe you're going to get a better, slightly improvement in case fill rate because you're going to have real-time data, you'll be able to see what's getting loaded on the trucks as they're getting ready to ship out, rather than having to wait until the next day. Yeah. That's just an example, but you start talking about those KPIs and say if you could get some slight improvements on them, what does that translate into business value?
Right. Okay, slide 12. So we're looking at some of the business drivers and trying to understand the impact. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, here we're just getting into a little bit more of our kind of our methodology of how we collect all those. So we're having these interviews and we're asking these pretty open-ended questions, and we're capturing everything that they're saying, but then how do we translate that then into actual value drivers that we can collect and turn into a business case.
So, for
So we try.
example, just a quick question there. So, you have everything as drivers. We have everything from revenue generation to cost reduction to operational efficiency to new capabilities to customer satisfaction, and then there's an impact scale. So, is the goal to kind of assign the level of impact to each of these drivers based on uh, is there a standard impact, or is it more like company by company what their priorities are? Or?
Sure, it would be company to company by what their
Mhm.
priorities are, what their line of business is, what they perceive to be their biggest challenges and areas where they
Okay.
want to focus and grow. Um, I think a lot of companies that are in the same industry are probably going to have very similar impacts on some of them.
Yeah.
But it may vary by industry or each company's operating model.
Right. All right. Let's have a look at what's next. So now this next slide 15, it kind of drills out some examples of pain points, some of the drivers which could vary, some of the benefits, and then the level of impact. And I'm seeing here that the way that you structure this slide, it looks to me like the top one uh, kind of has the highest impact because it has the most drivers and by far the most benefits. And this one, in this case, is difficult. The pain point is difficult to analyze pricing by region, leading to potential lost opportunities to optimize pricing on a regional basis. There's a number of drivers, and then there's quite a lot of benefits. So is this the kind of thing you run into where a lot of times when you go through these, there's one or two that are the highest impact?
Yes, that's pretty common. We'll find one or two that maybe have the highest impact, um, and then quite a few others that may have medium or low impacts.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as you can gather, in this case, from this example, if they were to be able to more dynamically adjust pricing by region, that's going
Right.
to drive more revenue, probably increase their sales. Also, it provide some cost savings because if they're underpricing in an area where they could price higher, they're missing some opportunity there. Also, improve customer service, making sure that they're pricing at the right level uh, that their consumers will be most pleased with. So, easy to understand how there's a lot of different drivers from something like that.
Right.
Um, you know,
So so does that then become like one of the top candidates for I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. We'll get to this, but that becomes one of the top candidates for a HANA proof of concept. Then is the things that surface from this process.
right, exactly. So,
Mm,
yeah, as we go further, we talk about doing a proof of concept. So
mhm.
we would pick maybe one of the top three or four drivers, especially if they could all be done within a single project, and do a proof of concept on those to prove out that they can really be done.
Gotcha. Okay.
Um, one of the other things that comes out of this is we would then kind of build a roadmap of what different solutions should be deployed. So, and that's coming up in the next few slides, but we talk HANA, that's a pretty broad thing. There's a lot of applications, a lot of use cases,
Right.
a lot of solutions on HANA. Um, and so, we may identify 50 different value drivers or process areas where they could be improved. That may not all be all on the same single project on HANA. If we say we're going to roll out financial reporting on HANA, that may only address 5 or so of those different value drivers.
Right.
So we
Okay.
may end up creating a roadmap that has 4 or 5 different projects in it over the next year or so to address each one of those.
Gotcha. All right. Well, let's get to that. So now slide 14 is sort of an overview slide where we're now we need to really understand the uses and benefits of SAP HANA. And I'll just make my comment there, which is that I find that a lot of customers' understanding of what HANA is capable of is still somewhat limited sometimes. For example, they may not know about all the startup applications and the add-ons available in the HANA marketplace and so forth. So that's part of what we're going to get into here. So now we're slide 15, and you make that exact point in slide 15, which is new capabilities and applications are coming out like rapidly, and so the HANA marketplace, SAPHANA.com, has a ton of information on use cases. There's also a massive use case wiki on SCN that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So your point is we can't build a business case just yet. We now we have to understand all these different pieces of HANA and how they might fit into a project scenario.
Right. Yes. Um, and I just want to clarify that when I put this slide out there, this was at the HANA conference. So there was probably about 50 additional sessions that were diving into all the other different use cases of HANA. So I didn't want to spend a lot of time trying to cover each one of them in this particular presentation. But certainly we've got plenty of material on that, and you know, that alone could be a whole separate presentation just talking about all the HANA use cases and solutions.
Right. But the point is you have to understand that piece of it in order to map your requirements with the right solution and understand what the options are. So now we're into slide 16, where we kind of go through some of the most common use cases, including BW on HANA, which I think a lot of folks are aware of because that's one of the most popular use cases. And then ECC, and you're pointing out that sidecar, HANA as ECC sidecars is the most likely ECC use case, which makes a lot of sense. A lot of companies aren't ready to put their system of record on HANA yet, but they could potentially still use that data for real-time reports, or maybe pull in some non-SAP data into that system. Is that the kind of thing you're seeing?
Yep, absolutely. So by doing the ECC sidecar, they can actually repoint some of their ECC transactions, their slower transactions, to the HANA system so that they'll get the benefit. It'll feel like they're still in ECC. I mean, they don't actually have to leave the system. They're still running their transactions reports within the main ECC box. It's just accelerated now and sped up on HANA. As a matter of fact, I'm giving a presentation at Sapphire coming up where we have a customer success story that they did this. And some of their GL line item browser reports used to take anywhere from 30 minutes to several hours to come back, and now they're coming back in a few seconds.
How long? 30 seconds?
So in some cases, 10 seconds or less. Yeah.
10 seconds less. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So taking advantage of HANA as ECC for what it can do without necessarily taking the huge plunge of putting your transactional system of record on it.
Right. Yes.
Yep. Okay.
And then the other benefit of that approach is you also have now all your ECC data sitting in HANA, and you can, as you mentioned, bring in external data, build custom models on top of that. Really gives you the ability to do a lot more with your operational reporting, both in and outside of ECC.
Which, by the way, is one of the key points. I think the reason that I'm a fan of analytics solutions in general is you have all this ERP transactional data, which in theory has a ton of market intelligence, but you really need a high-performance database environment to really understand what you can do with that. So this is one more step forward along that path.
Yep.
Now, these other slides here that we're going to get to, the next couple, slide 17, here's some more HANA use cases. I'd like to skip through this because HANA use cases are out there to be explored. We're not going to be trying to cover all of them in this presentation, but a few popular ones, the EPM BPC 10 on HANA, accelerated trade promotion management, predictive analysis. So those are several that are coming into the fore. And then, that's it for that particular slide series. So anyway, you just basically outlined some of the most popular HANA use cases, and then of course there's a bunch of startup apps that could be interesting, especially if you have a particular industry where the applications are a good fit, like there's some good utility solutions, for example. So anyway, so just understanding the use cases. Now we slip ahead to number 10, which kind of connects some of the applications with some of the value drivers, which also sort of makes sense. So depending on what your agenda is, whether you're trying to improve service or reduce cost or increase operational efficiency or what have you, the same 5 value drivers we covered earlier, there's going to be different corresponding HANA solutions that best address those areas. So with innovation, it might be predictive analysis. So essentially that's what you would want to do, is sort of map the potential solutions with whatever you're trying to achieve.
Right, exactly. And when we get into this value wheel, this is just a way of visualizing it in a term that we kind of coined and trademarked at Teklink. But like you said, it's just taking everything you identified as during those interviews as the value drivers, mapping them, having mapped them to the different HANA solutions, and then really start to plug them into, we have a calculation template, and then it lets you start to visualize and rate and prioritize those based on which area is going to give you the most bang for your buck.
Yep, makes sense. Okay, slide 19. So now we're going to move into the next section of the presentation. We're a little more than halfway through, FYI, folks. And this is about creating a HANA Value Wheel, which is what you just referred to. So the next slide, on slide 20, is the HANA Value Wheel. Essentially taking some of these drivers and putting them together, and these are the building blocks for the business case that we're going to get to, right?
Right. Yep, exactly. Yeah. So slide 20 just kind of gives an overview. I think one of the other important things is here is where we actually start to put dollar values on those.
Okay.
So and this was something we also tried to capture during the interviews, but asking people for their best guess estimate. And I guess we'll get to that when I get to the next slide after this. But starting to put dollar values on there, and then also starting to put in a discount rate or apply a risk factor as well. And that's where, you know, the risk part of that net present value formula comes in.
And that was one of the things that I liked best about your presentation, by the way, was that you didn't run away from the issue of risk like a lot of vendors hyping HANA do, but you also didn't take a fear-based thing on risk either, but a pure mathematical approach to risk, which to me is what risk management is all about, is doing your darndest to come up with an accurate mathematical figure for risk based on the scenario. So I think that's important. Now we head to slide number 21, which I guess sort of takes a look at the limitations of current business processes, capabilities that HANA could provide, and then opportunities. How does this fit into everything?
Well, this is really taking that next step where we say current state limitation, but really that's could be any one of those data starting capabilities. So based on the solution, in this one, this is again an example. Most of these are ones that came out of a BW on HANA evaluation. So you'll see things like BW workspaces, ad hoc analysis. Those are all capabilities if you go BW on HANA that you get. But this just shows again some of the template we use for mapping those value drivers against the HANA capability to get to the opportunity that it can provide.
One interesting thing about this slide is that the limitations that you described to me are not just SAP limitations, but almost limitations I would associate with like almost any sort of legacy system of record on-premise type of thing, where projects take 6 months or more and you're always running things by IT. And on the right, all these opportunities, the words that stand out are things like real-time and agile, empowering end users, flexible reporting, what-if scenarios, mobile analytics, faster response times. This sounds like the business that most enterprises want to be involved with to stay competitive, you know?
Exactly. Yep. And so many of the clients we work with, those are all key points of their BI strategy. You know, if you talk to any one of their BI directors, they usually will have many or all of those in their future strategy for what they see as their future BI state over the next 3 to 5 years.
Right.
So again, this just is how we kind of help position HANA to say that really plugs into that whole strategy to deliver on so many of those items.
Right. Okay. So number 22, which is a template. You want to explain what the template is about?
Sure. So this is where we actually start putting the numbers in and getting some dollar amounts. So again, coming out of those interviews, we ask the process area owners, give us your best guess. As we talked about, if you could improve one of your KPIs by X amount, what's the best guess, highest possible business value that would give you? We really do ask them to see if they can put a number on it. Now, a lot of times, they may say, well, I don't know, maybe it's this, maybe it's that, but highest possible, the highest range, if you want to shoot for the sky, give us a dollar value on it. And so that's where we take that and put that in that estimated ROI column. And then we follow that up with how certain are you that that could be achieved.
Right.
We ask for the highest one, but then we want to apply that discount rate or that risk factor.
Right. So you've got a number for your goal for ROI, how often you could achieve that. In this case, it's annually, and then you have what's a likelihood, and you're modifying for risk, and now you're getting a net present value number. So this we're beginning to build into the mathematics behind your presentation, which we're going to get to a little further here. So let's continue along.
Sure.
So what's going on with slide 23?
So slide 23 is now just showing a sample of, we do that for every single one of those value driver line items that we identified.
Okay.
So, and we do it for each slice of the value wheel. So here I'm showing a sample of one where we just did it on, in this case, IT cost savings. As far as with this sample, they were going to replace their current Oracle database with HANA. So you'll see there's some options there where they were going to be able to eliminate some of their Oracle maintenance and ongoing costs there, as well as some opportunities, cost savings they'll get by speeding up their ability to deliver agile BI models and lowering their SLA breaches. And so we would take this, but this is just one sample. We would do the same thing again for the areas of customer service improvement, innovation and new capabilities, revenue generation, all the different slices of the
all the different pieces. Gotcha. And so just for clarification, this digging into the numbers for each of these, this is before any proof of concept ever happens. You're still you're still kind of building the overall understanding of what you might accomplish.
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. And again, like I said, on the estimated ROI, we ask them for the highest possible value. So a lot of times they give a range. It's very common. They say, well, it could be between X and Y. We want to take the high end of the range because then, we're saying we're going to put a risk factor on that. So we're not saying that you're 100% certain you're going to get that. But we want to go high and then factor in that discount rate to get a true estimate of what we think it would be.
Gotcha. Okay. Slide 24, and this is an example where you've illustrated the value wheel, and you've broken it down also in terms of departmental area, finance, IT, logistics. Tell us about that.
Sure. So here now is you get to the final piece of it where you've built your whole value wheel across all the different areas, and we've got different ways that we can look at it. So we could look at it by the different the different value drivers we described earlier, or we have the ability to look at it by department. We could look at it by business unit. There's a lot of different ways that you can break that down. And what it starts to give you, and this is like an example of the final value wheel, that picture of where you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck when you deploy HANA. And that then lets you start to plan out, all right, if I'm going to do a roadmap for deploying HANA, which areas should go live first? What are the first projects that I should plan to roll out? And then potentially also, how should I seek to get this funded? Depending on how your organizational cost structures are set up, maybe IT shoulders the full burden, or maybe you share it and have, in this example, you can see logistics is going to get a lot out of it, so maybe you ask them to fund 40% of the project cost, and have sales and trade fund 18%, and actually allocate costs to each department based on the estimated ROI they plan to achieve.
Yeah, I guess it helps a lot to hold out your if you're IT and you're trying to get people to donate. It helps a lot when you can show them exactly what they can expect to get out of it. So that makes a lot of sense. And now I think this is all going to be part of one deck, but I need to move over to the other one you gave me for the purposes of today's discussion. And you wanted to talk briefly, I think, about technical roadmap evaluation.
Yeah, absolutely. So once now we're at the point where you've built a value wheel, you can start to see the different areas where you're going to get the most return on your investment, all the different value drivers that HANA will address. And from there, you want to start to plot it out. So we know what we want to deploy, we know where it's going to give the most return, and now you have to start figuring out how you approach it. So we take that next step and help our clients build a roadmap. So on this first slide here, I'm just kind of showing a sample. Let's start with a future state vision. When it's all deployed, how do you want the future of your BI landscape to look? And HANA playing a part of that. And then you also need to make sure that you're taking into consideration things like the technical feasibility, compatibility with your current landscape, and also always keeping in mind that there's new technologies and innovations coming out from SAP, but making sure you're not picking something that's going to be shelved or that's going to be sunsetted in the foreseeable future.
So you got to have an overall BI roadmap. You can't just chart out, okay, here's what we're going to do with HANA. You have to understand how these business cases are going to fit in from an architectural standpoint, so you don't end up with the dreaded technical debt and spaghetti infrastructure later on, and appliances that don't talk to each other. You have to sort all that out on a roadmap basis.
Right, exactly.
Yep, okay. And then we have another slide, I think, on this topic, which is plotting projects for future deployment.
Exactly. And so again, now you know what your future state is going to look like, and now you just need to kind of put together that roadmap of how you're going to get there. And so here I'm just showing some examples. You can prioritize it and say, well, we know eventually everyone's going to be on HANA, but we can only do so much at one time. So maybe you prioritize who goes first based on which one has the highest net present value or internal return rate, which was identified during the business case evaluation.
Or you could take into account technical dependencies, like this is our highest priority use case, but we need this technical piece in place in order to do it. So essentially you map it all to a specific calendar.
Right, exactly.
Correct? Okay.
And you can see at the bottom here, I'm showing maybe you can assign who's funding each of the projects too. So
gotcha.
This is a sample. Again, in this case, it's BW on HANA, but the first half of the year, maybe IT's funding, just rolling out the landscape and doing some of the common global stuff like master data, and then you actually seek business departments to fund each of their particular project migrations.
Gotcha. Okay. So now we're back to our main slide deck, and we're now, if I've done my math right, we are on slide number 27, which is now we're at the POC, which is a key piece of the process that you recommend for avoiding some of the riskier scenarios. So
Sure.
Now we're going to move into that. So tell us about this first POC slide.
Well, we recommend doing a proof of concept because that also factors into the whole risk and probability component of building out that business case. So people say, well, if you could achieve this, then we'd get this much business value or return on investment out of it. But maybe they're skeptical that it could really be done, or maybe they don't really know if it's possible, technically achievable, based on some complexities they have in their landscape. Or a lot of times we talk to clients, they have so much custom development, customized code, or in-house application. If you want to improve that level of probability and basically lower your discount rate or increase that probability component in our value wheel calculations, the best way to do that is to do a proof of concept.
Yep. Okay. So I'd like to skip over the proof of concept stuff in terms of detail,
Sure.
just so we can get to the meat of the business case. But you kind of go through in this slide, which is number 29 now, you go through some of the scenarios of proof of concepts, how they can be conducted, and the key takeaway is that now with the technology, you don't have to do a massive internal proof of concept. You can do it on the cloud. You can do it with a partner, with a hosted solution, or you can buy your own sandbox. But the point is, there's a lot of flexibility now.
Sure. Yep, and we've done we as a partner we've done that. We have our own lab where we've done proof of concepts for clients. Um, so it's a little bit of a plug for Teklink. We'd like people to use us. Of course, there's other options out there too.
Yeah, yeah. So we have on slide number 30, 30 here. It's just an example of a HANA proof of concept. In this case, it was a BPC on HANA proof of concept, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So the next few slides, I'm just sharing some results of a proof of concept we did at a client. As you mentioned, it was for BPC. They were on an older version on 7.5, I believe,
Yeah.
and they wanted to upgrade, and they were trying to determine whether they should just upgrade or also upgrade and move to HANA. And so we helped do that. We took their system, installed it in our lab, performed the upgrade, migrated to HANA, and then in the next couple slides, just showing some of the results that came back and how there really was a dramatic difference across a lot of the things they were measuring by putting it on HANA.
Yeah, the interesting thing on slide 31 is that you ran some scenarios of 7.5 on Oracle, 10.0 on Oracle, 10.0 on HANA. So you had different environments to sort of benchmark against each other. In slide 32, we have the POC results where you show some comparisons between a couple of the different benchmarks you ran across various categories, including data loads and ad hoc reporting, and obviously there's some percentage benefits that are fairly significant for each one. So essentially that's a classic POC scenario, but adding some A/B testing kind of features to compare different possibilities for how you could go forward.
Right. Yeah.
And then in slide 36, similar type of thing where you're showing a graphical illustration of some of these benefits, which when you see it graphically like that, it's definitely, I would think it would help win a customer over to what the real benefits are going to be, because they've already tested it now and it's for real. So
Exactly. Yeah.
let me just ask you one quick thing around POCs. I think the before we move to the final section, the one hesitancy I've seen about POCs is that in the earlier days of HANA, it seemed like the POCs themselves could get fairly elaborate, and then at the end of it, if you didn't decide to go forward, you had devoted a significant amount of resources and time to the POC itself, which of course is better than like a huge project that doesn't work out, but it can still get pretty expensive pretty quickly sometimes. Have you guys seen more of a trend towards a more streamlined approach to a POC?
Um, well, yes, we have. So, you want to your point, you want to limit the scope of your POC. You don't want to try and do everything possible, or it can start to balloon out of control as far as cost and complexity. Um, I think you want to approach the POC, taking maybe, like I said, one or two of the top most important value drivers that you identified during the business case. You don't want to try and do every single thing, but take the top ones and
Yep.
really just try and test out those.
Yep. And consider cloud and hosted environments and things like that to make it a little easier if you need to. Though obviously sometimes you will need to do it on your own environment, but okay, now we're getting to the part that I've been looking forward to through our talk to this point, which is putting the numbers together, like essentially tying these different pieces we've spelled out into some number crunching, but also some really clear ideas about how effective the approach is going to be. So now we are on slide 35, where we are really just taking a look at revisiting these numbers. Quick comment on that?
Well, it's just back to that that formula we showed at the very beginning, the net present value formula. We
Yep.
knew there was 4 inputs that we had to define, and
Right.
now we kind of walk through how we define each one of those,
Right.
and just kind of a quick review. The benefits we've collected
Yep.
by doing our interviews and mapping those critical value processes. The cost, and I didn't really talk too much about it, but that's pretty easy to derive once you've identified the HANA use cases and solutions you
Right.
plan to deploy, which comes out as part of that roadmap. Time, similarly, I mentioned, what's your expected lifespan, either 5 years, or based on your roadmap, you may have a better idea. And then finally, the risk, we talked on that too, putting in that probability factor and possibly reducing it if you've done a proof of concept.
And by this time, with hardware and license costs, you understood your use case, so you've probably had a long, friendly/aggressive talk with your SAP sales representative, and you have some numbers that you could potentially plug in here that you know are going to be fairly accurate.
Right. Yes.
So here we are on slide 34, and you're showing some examples of how to plug in some of these numbers. And in this case, it's a BPC 10 on HANA deployment with a 5-year time frame. Any comment on these numbers?
Well, take the numbers with a grain of salt. This is all meant to be sample or example material. I'm not really able to show true customer numbers. So, this is again for sample purposes. But in theory, yes, what you're showing here is, first of all, the proof of concept. We bake that in as a cost. But again, that could be a small initial cost versus the full potential $1 million investment you'd be paying for the full solution. And then here you can see across the different value drivers what the expected annual cash flow or value would be that each one would deliver over the 5 years of the solution. And then at the bottom, we've got the different risk levels. So you can either apply a risk level across the board, or we can, as we showed earlier, you can apply one to each one of the value drivers individually. And you can show that in this case we've got a low, moderate, and high risk. Assuming the proof of concept is successful, you probably go with the low risk.
Mm-hmm.
And based on each one of those, it shows you what your net present value would be for the project.
Right. The other interesting thing, I think, Tony, is that I would expect in the years to come that some of that investment money that's all tied into the first sort of year zero, the initial outlay, some of that is going to potentially get spread out over time as other features like subscription pricing, whether it's through the HANA Enterprise Cloud or what have you, that might make these numbers even a little more appealing to certain customers, where if they don't have that cash on hand, they can project that initial investment out over several years and weigh it against the risk a little bit differently.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Right.
I expect we'll hear more about that. Probably hear more about that at Sapphire, if I had to guess.
Yes. Now, I didn't, in this example, I didn't put maintenance costs or support costs year over year. In some cases, you may want to include those. In this case, we took the assumption that they're already paying maintenance costs for their existing solution, so it would be a wash. It would be kind of a zero change from what they already had in place. So that's why we chose not to include that as recurring cost for years 1 through 5.
Gotcha. So that's kind of the final stage of that sort of process of putting the numbers together. And so at that point, you have really sort of drilled down on a particular use case. In this case, BPC 10 on HANA. You've been through that whole discussion with your business users, but now you've also really drilled into the numbers. So what happens at this point? What would it be like? Okay, now let's greenlight a POC. Is that sort of the next step?
Yes. So usually then the next step would be, hopefully take it and ask for the investment for the POC, and potentially then, based on your roadmap, start to seek the funding for your next few projects.
Right. And probably have a better chance of getting approval for the POC because you have risk-adjusted numbers, you have potential benefits broken down into categories like operational efficiencies, and you also have this documentation from process owners, you have delineated benefits by department, so you essentially have a pretty intelligent proposal on how this stuff's going to work, not just, well, we could make this faster and get rid of a couple of servers or whatever.
Right. Exactly. Yep. I mean, I would recommend, if people do this ahead of their annual project portfolio planning. So I know a lot of companies have their annual portfolio planning that comes up around mid-year or kind of going into Q3 of their fiscal year. That's the good time to do this before that, so that when you go into that portfolio planning, you have to think there's going to be a lot of different areas seeking funding, a lot of different projects that are going to be put up for approval. So you want to make sure you have your business case created, you have your numbers together, you have done all your homework and legwork ahead of time, and that's going to really give you the best shot to get your projects approved.
Yeah, so when we skip ahead here to the final slides, I'm actually on 39 now, but I'm just kind of looking at your summary take-home points, which is kind of what we were already getting into.
Yeah.
But just kind of going through this again. I think the first of all, we're kind of taking a project finance business case approach, not just a tech-centric approach. We're diving into net present value, which can look like an intimidating formula until we realize that a lot of the values from that can be plugged in based on standard financial operations numbers that are proven or at least accepted by accountants, and then they can be modified for your project based on things like risk adjustments, which a POC can impact. But the really big thing is in my mind, is these interviews with department heads and process owners, because now you've really pulled the business into the entire HANA planning scenario, and you're looking at these analytics projects and these big data projects from a much more collaborative perspective in my mind, and it seems to me that's at the heart of your whole thing here.
Absolutely, and you're right. That is the heart of it. Without involving the business, we're finding it can be very tough to make a solid business case when you're only looking at it from an IT perspective for HANA. And that's really just because it's got a high price right now. It's at a premium, and so if you really want to build that case, you really got to loop in the business. And as I said earlier, just cast as wide a net as possible for different ways that HANA can benefit your organization.
And just walking through the take-home points a little more, it's important then to understand how these potential requirements, opportunities, frustration points actually fit into what's realistically possible within HANA, which usually means some education on what the current product offerings are. It might even mean benchmarking HANA against some other solutions. And then this other key point that I think you hit on well was then you're going to build what you call a value wheel, but the key point there is now you're starting to take these processes these business users have raised as critical or high impact, and you need to start assigning dollar values to them, because that's how you're going to really start to build out your final sort of numerical calculations. So you started with more of an ad hoc discussion, but now you're really starting to assign numbers.
Right. Yep. Exactly.
That's really interesting. So have you seen this work well? I mean, to me, on paper, it seems like a refreshingly practical approach. Have you had, what kind of response have you had from customers on this?
Generally, it's been very positive. So we have seen it work quite well. As you can gather, I mean, it doesn't work unless the customer is engaged and willing to go through it with us.
Right.
So they have to want to do it as well, and of course they need to have cooperation and buy-in from their business to go through the process as well.
Right.
A lot of times we seen cases where used with the different business areas and process owners. They tell us about the projects they have planned for their department in the next year or so. And a lot of times you find there's a lot of synergies. Or when you start telling them what IT is planning, they say, well, maybe we can just do ours in conjunction with you and build it out on the HANA platform rather than try and install and do some whole things separately as they were earlier planning. So I think, it's, as you touched on, the most important thing is just getting that dialogue going with the business. And I think a lot of times it's tough for people in an IT department to do that. And so that's why it's helpful to bring in a third party or bring in consultants because they can start to facilitate that cross-department communication that may be a little bit more difficult from within an organization.
Yeah, and you're really stepping into the IT business gap in some sense, and some companies probably are pretty good at bridging that gap, and others might find that more challenging. But to me, it's such a necessary conversation. It goes well beyond HANA, and it extends into this issue of, how do we really understand the impact of our enterprise investment in a way that is really forward-thinking for the business so that it makes sense, because right now so many line of business folks are kind of installing their own cloud solutions because they don't feel that what IT is doing is relevant to what they're trying to solve. So the thing I like about your model is that it provokes those kinds of conversations, but I'm sure that it's not always easy, and I'm sure that some customers might need some outside help to kind of spark that and avoid kind of, I don't know what you call it, not bitch fest necessarily, but like name calling or just frustrations and resentments that get unearthed,
Oh, sure. Yep, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you said it exactly right. And I don't, this methodology, it can be applied to really any type of IT investment. It doesn't have to be HANA. Of course, we are big in the SAP space, and so with HANA being the hot new thing, that's why we think it makes the most sense to use this for HANA. But I think it could be applied to any IT project.
Yeah, which is really why I was drawn to digging into this methodology with you. And I've never really taken a deep dive in a presentation like this, but one of the reasons I wanted to do it is just because just think that there's so much meat on the bone here that folks can either take to either start a dialogue with you or take to adapt to their own models. And to me, this is the kinds of conversations that I wish we were having more often, as opposed to, oh my God, I can run this report 1,000 times faster. And it's like, well, in some cases that might make a huge business difference, but in other cases it just doesn't, and we got to accept that.
Right.
I talk to some people and they're like, well, I'm used to going out for lunch while my report runs, So, what would they like it to be sped up? Sure, but anyway, I like how you dig so far beyond that in this scenario. So I really appreciate you taking the time to dig in with me on this.
Well, it's my pleasure, John, and I appreciate you taking the time to dig into it as well.
Yeah, and I'll just to let our listeners know, I was tracking Tony's audio during the conversation, and I believe that he did short out a few times for brief moments, but none of the timeouts affected what he was actually trying to say in the long run. So just so you know, you didn't miss anything important, and I was tracking that, but I made an editorial decision that the sound quality was good enough as a whole, and I believe it was. So just want you to know I'm not asleep at the wheel here. But anyhow, Tony, I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to talk about True Detective at all. We had an excellent debate on that topic at HANA 2014, and there's probably a small percentage of our listeners that would love to hear us rehash that now on the record, but it's not going to happen because we've been talking for an hour now. So, but if you see us at Sapphire, feel free to ask us about some of our competing theories on the unfolding True Detective miniseries that has wrapped on HBO, and we'll fill you in.
Sure.
Just a little hint, Tony's on the H.P. Lovecraft side, so. And it looks like...
start a new debate.
Sorry, what's that, Tony?
Oh, I just said, yeah, I like...
What's that?
I'm more of a fan of the supernatural.
Right. You like the supernatural elements.
Right.
But anyhow, folks, we're not going to get into that any further. So thanks for listening to us today, and I will get an audio narrated version of this on SlideShare so you can watch the slides along with the narration, and I hope you enjoyed it. Take care, Tony. Appreciate your time.
All right. Thanks, John.